back at the Maple Hill Cemetery, and today the Eaton County Historic Commission is going to be doing another historic walking tour. So come along and join me. This should be a lot of fun.
Good afternoon. Hello. Welcome to the annual cemetery tour hosted by the Eaton County Historical Commission. We do this to raise funds to help preserve history in the county, and we do that by awarding grants to other historical groups in this county. So we've distributed funds for the last 20 years, and actually since 1776 when this commission was first begun. So, all right, sorry, that would be 1976. Charlotte wasn't founded at that time either. But that's another story. So just follow the hat and we'll be taking off. It's a beautiful day. We thank you for coming. As I said, we need to raise funds to preserve our history in the county. So off we go. Thanks.
Good afternoon. I'm Fitch H. And before I tell you about my life, I want to dispel two things you've probably heard about me. The first was they identified me in my obituary as an eccentric philanthropist / industrialist. I wasn't eccentric. I just knew how to get things done. For instance, some of you probably heard that I had a stuffed bobcat on my porch. That was absolutely true. And the reason why I had a stuffed bobcat there was because my housekeeper insisted on feeding the feral cats, and they would come and sit underneath my window and caterwaul. Well, I told her to quit feeding the cats and to get them away from my door. I found this stuffed bobcat, put it there. The second thing is, I want to tell you right now that my checkbook is closed. I've donated many things to my adopted hometown of Charlotte. Let me tell you about that. I was born in a tar paper shack on the upper Mississippi River in Grant County, Wisconsin, November 10th of 1864. My family moved to Middleville, Michigan 4 years later. Evidently, my father didn't listen to Horace Greeley, who said, "Move west, young man." They moved back to Michigan. My brother and I started a business in Lyons, Michigan about 1890, building road equipment. We became the nation's #1 company for road equipment. And we also built steel culverts, and that was the basis of my fortune. Now, I married in 1888. We moved to Charlotte about 1903. And this is my adopted hometown. I had no children. One of the things I saw in this town that we needed was a farmer's market, a place for gardeners and farmers to sell their truck crops. So I donated the money for that, but I had 3 conditions. The first was the market be named after me. The second was that they reserve a parking spot for me. And the third was my friends could never ask me again for money. Well, that was 1922, and a lot of my friends kept asking me for money over the years. How many of you have been out to the airport? Who's it named after? Fitch H. I was a member of the flying club. And I thought they had no airport except for this farmer's field. It was rather a plain place, so I donated the money for it. I also donated the money for the clubhouse at the country club and the American Legion Hall. After I died in 1952, part of my bequest was $30,000 for what you used to call the Hayes Green Beach Hospital. Now, I said that my wallet is closed, but I lied. Actually, 70 years after my death in 1952, my bequest is still giving. Most of my estate went to my niece, Erna Janet Beatty from Charlotte. She set up an endowed award at Michigan State for the top engineering student in the PhD program, and that award is given every year. Ladies and gentlemen, that's my story. I do want to leave you with a little bit of the card I would give to my friends when they would ask me for money. Let me just read a little bit of this. Helps if I hold it right side up. Dear friend, in reply to your request to send a check, I wish to inform you that the present condition of my bank account makes it almost impossible. My shattered financial condition is due to federal laws, liquor laws, mother-in-laws, sister-in-laws, and outlaws. I'll skip to the last paragraph. I can tell you honestly that except for the miracle that happened, I could not enclose this check. The wolf that comes to many doors nowadays just had pups in my kitchen. I sold them, and here's your money. Yours faithfully, F.H. Beach. Thank you.
Good afternoon. It's wonderful to see you all today walking about such a pleasant day. My name is Lena Parker Smith. This is my husband, J.M.C. Smith, who is actually a congressman for Michigan's 3rd District from 1911 to 1923. I was born on August 19th of 1867 in Washtenaw to my parents John and Harriet Parkhurst. I'm quite proud of my father, who graduated with a degree in law from the University of Michigan in 1861. He then served as a major in the Union Army, the Civil War, and he passed away in 1923. He was at the time the oldest living law graduate from the University of Michigan at 86 years old. Both he and my mother are buried here at Maple Hill with me. I had a little sister named Etta, who unfortunately passed away at the young age of 19. We were close in age, only about a year apart actually, so her death really broke my heart. My husband, JMC, was born in Belfast, Ireland on the February 6th of 1853 to Richard and Barbara McMunn Smith. One of his middle names, McMunn, or the M, was a nod to his mother's family. They immigrated to Ohio in 1855. John was just 2 years old. When John was 13 in the year of 1867, he and his family moved here to Charlotte, where he would graduate high school. He also started working in farming and stonemasonry, which are both quite laborious. He excelled, though, and became known to be the fastest bricklayer in this part of the country. John was also very intelligent, graduating from the University of Michigan just like my father, with a degree in literature in 1879 and just a year later, a degree in law. He was admitted to the bar in 1882 and began practicing law in Detroit. He was talented and hardworking, so was appointed the prosecuting attorney for Eaton County in 1885 and served that office until 1888. It was during that time that John and I were married. On October 23rd, 1887, I was 20 and he was 34. Our little Lucille was born just 2 years later, and our son William Parkhurst followed in 1897. The next year, in 1898, John became president of the First National Bank of Charlotte. Doesn't he look handsome? In 1908, John was a member of the State Constitutional Convention, and soon after he was elected to Congress from the 3rd District. According to the Battle Creek Inquirer, the secret to Smith's success at the polls lies in the fact that he has a lot of good friends throughout the different parts of his district who gets to oppose him in the primaries. In this manner, he breaks up the support of other candidates and brings the majority of the votes. He served as the chair of the House Committee on Labor Relations during his time in office. In 1921, his time was through, and he planned to return to Charlotte and practice law. He stated that he left Congress with less wealth than when he entered due to the high cost of living in Washington. He was succeeded by William Frankhausen of Hillsdale, but Frankhausen was unable to take a seat and died in a sanitarium just a few months later. Smith was elected to fill the vacancy, which was his 7th term, and died in office on March 30th, 1923. The Battle Creek and Kalamazoo letter carriers attended his funeral, explaining that he was a true friend of the post office employees, and during his work in Washington, he looked out for their interests whenever the opportunity arose. He definitely helped out Charlotte's post office. In 1912, he requested $75,000 to build a new federal building, the post office, and it was approved. It is currently at the corner of Bostwick and Lovett Streets. He was active in the Freemasons, the Scottish Rite, Knights Templar, the Shriners, the Odd Fellows, the Knights of Pythians, the Knights of the Maccabees, and the ancient Arabic order of the Nobles of the Mystic Shrine. He was so busy. I passed away on April 26, 1931. While both me and my husband lived lives of zeal and hard work, I am most proud of my children too. Our daughter Lucille grew up to marry John Clifford in 1915. He was from Maine, and he also studied law and served in the Maine House of Representatives from 1914 to 1915. He was the U.S. Attorney for the District of Maine from 1933 to 1947 and became a U.S. District Court judge. He passed just a few months after my Lucille. Our son, William Parker Smith, was born in 1897, as I said. He actually chose to enter the military and was a World War I veteran. He married Hazel Hutchins and had a son of his own, whom he named William Parker Smith, Jr. William Jr. was a World War II veteran and Army Air Force cryptographer in the South Pacific. He also served as Vice President of Student Affairs for George Washington University for 2 decades. Thank you so much for coming today.
Well, I am here as Sally Searles, and I have to tell you I'm very old because I died at 79. So because of that, with your permission, I'm going to read what we have going here. I hope you won't mind. Because there is so much history about this family. I have to start back with my husband and his brother who came here. That was the Samuel and Jonathan, and or Johann maybe. I'm not sure exactly how that would be pronounced. All I know is that I'm going to jump forward a little bit to the history to the 1941 plan, because these two men were so instrumental in developing the area that in 1941 it was proposed that the road between Charlotte and Eaton Rapids be named Searle Road, which of course didn't happen. But that was the beginning of theirs going on. So they blazed the first trail actually between the two cities. But in 1835 the brothers found their way from Bellevue to Charlotte. And they later brought Samuel's wife, Ruth, and their household goods to the new Charlotte and from Bellevue. And no history tells me here right now how they ended up in Bellevue first, but maybe we'd find that out someday. But that was they were the first family. They had to cut a trail making for oxen to get through, because it was just an Indian trail between the two. And they made their way, they followed the Indian trail from Bellevue to the Indian village of Walton. And then for a long time, this was the only possible route between Charlotte and Bellevue. The men were both known as Hugh Woodsmen, and they could hew out anything you wanted, and were definitely had the skills with those broad axes to make paper-thin cuts of that wood, which really gave them a good reputation as to what was good for them. And they were responsible for all of the wood that was available. And so around 1837 was their claim to fame. And then Jonathan dragged the logs in with his oxen and to build the roofs and buildings of the homes there in Charlotte. They did the work of the sawmills.
We just can't hear you that far.
Oh, okay, I'm sorry. Anyway, they were responsible for they were the sawmill people in the area, and they helped make homes for all these folks. The brothers had no team to work with, meaning a team of horses, and so they were able to, with their own brute strength, they cut the logs for Sam's house. They worked alone, laying foundations for the city. And in February 1st of 1837, when Japhet Fisher arrived and started working for them, they had finally an employee. Sam's wife died at their house of consumption, which was common in tuberculosis, leaving an eight-month-old baby. All of the men were out working. There was no coffin to be had, so she was taken to Bellevue for a proper burial, which was about 17 miles away. They put some bedding in a lumber wagon and laid her for the beginning of the journey over rough trails and forging creeks. And her husband, Samuel, was badly distressed over and dressed for the occasion. He wore out his clothes working. So his corduroy pants, which was common at the time, were tattered at the knees, and a fragment of the old woolen cap was on his head, and his work jacket was in tatters. Japhet Fisher sent his trunk of clothes via a friend to meet on the way to Bellevue, and they were able to dress the husband, to be respectable at the funeral. The people of Bellevue turned out, and met the oxen team and took care of Ruth for her funeral for the next day. So then the brother, Samuel took the new 8-month-old baby back to his family in New York, and then brought his sister back with him to Eaton County to keep house for them. Jonathan, on the other hand, went and brought back his wife, Sally, who is in this purpose here, in November of 37. Their house at times became the county headquarters. They held caucuses, county conventions, and county caucuses. The men almost always stayed overnight. Sally had them all to wait on. She did the county cooking for years. In her words, we had a great deal of men's company in those days, but we seldom saw a woman. And it was in their home that the first county convention was held to nominate the first county officers in 1838. Political parties were not considered of any great favor at the time. Jonathan was one of the first county commissioners in 38, and then the postmaster. They had mail once a week, brought from Marshall, and it was delivered by a boy named Isaac. From the date of 1872 in the Charlotte Republican, Aunt Sally Searles was one of the earliest settlers of Eaton County, along with her husband, Jonathan. Mrs. Searles was the youngest daughter of Elvin and Wisely Burnt, and she was born in Salem, Massachusetts, 1797, excuse me. When she was 6 years old, they moved to another location. There she married Jonathan in May of 1814. Her husband belonged to the Volunteer Army in the War of 1812. He was wounded near Kingston while engaged in a kind of irregular warfare with the Indians. With a small party, he was drawn into ambush, surprised by an overwhelming number of savages, and nearly everyone in his command was killed. The rifle ball that wounded him remained in his body till his death. As we go forward, it tells exactly how influential these people were. Her husband Jonathan left on the morning of December 18, 1841, apparently in good health. He was later found dead. There being no burying grounds there at the time, he was buried on his own farm. His wife decided that his body should remain there until her death, and then it should be transferred to the place of her burial. She lived 36 years more than her husband did. They had a number of 11 children, and 9 of whom grew to maturity. She had acquired remarkable self-control amidst the dangers and hardships of pioneer life, and the vast vigor of her mind and body for the particular experiences of her history. When left in widowhood and charged with the outrageous responsibility of training and providing for her large family, she cheerfully confronted all of the difficulties in her way, accomplished her task, and in every case, nobly finished her work. She was never heard to murmur against the allotments of her life, but cheerfully and affectionately provide for the family that she was in charge of. She boasts virtues, and it's like a woman that had her hardships, but had the personality as we described her. And so actually, if you look here, we have Jonathan's individual marker, we have Sally, and we have the other children, of the family surrounding them. And, the actual inscription is not very visible here because of the shadow, but Jonathan is listed here. But keep in mind that she died at 79 years old. And so she is always, been thought of fondly of the area, even though we don't hear about those people anymore, because, that's history. And young people aren't necessarily realizing what the history is here and how this little area began. Like, for instance, 6 daughters were with her during the entire period of her illness, and 5 of them were present at her death. When she came here, there was not any other family in this whole prairie. And the first meeting for a long time afterwards, the only religious service was held in her house. Her house was a post office, a courthouse, church, tavern, and private dwelling, plainly furnished and consists of 1 room with 18 living there. Now that's really cohabitating for sure. And yet amidst all of the annoyances in such a home surrounded by the shadow of an almost unbroken wilderness, her children, that no word complaint ever escaped their lips. She was she was uniformly cheery, happy, and content. As the years went on and the elderly settlers with those who were afterwards began to grow rich and surround themselves with all the appointments of wealth, she entered heartily into the cheers and comforts of what was becoming. So we are so proud to have the opportunity to be here and witness another wonderful settler of this area. And I'm hoping that you all have the opportunity to maybe take a peek and see. But thank you so much for letting me join in with you today.
Younger brother, Harry, and his wife, Julia. And then surrounding our family members, there was another wife, and Ruth is down here, as well as sons and grandsons. So I was the first wife of Sidney Allen, and we married in 1841 and came to Michigan soon afterwards. Sidney purchased 80 acres in Eaton Township for $125 in 1839. We knew that we would marry when we left New York State, but it was important to him that the shelter be ready for me when I arrived. His younger brother, Harry, came from New York State with Sidney. The country was very wild then. There were only a few families in the southeast corner of Eaton County. The brothers' uncle, William Wall, was one of the earliest settlers in Eaton Township. It's written of these men that they belonged to the class of sturdy pioneers who formed the vanguard of civilization here and toiled and endured, buoyed up by the hope of better times and the desire to promote the food of posterity. Sidney's mother's name was Wall. She was William Wall's sister. The Allens, Walls, and Southworths, which remember is my maiden name, knew each other in upstate New York. So when Uncle William Wall decided to move west to rich and unclaimed land, it got us all thinking about it. Uncle William was one of the first 4 known settlers in Eaton Township. He settled on the mail road between Jackson and Grand Rapids. It was then called the Old Clinton Trail, or sometimes referred to as Searles Street when you got closer to Charlotte. This was in June of 1836. William's tiny hamlet became known as Wall Settlement and had a post office even before Charlotte did. My brothers, James, William, and George Southworth came to settle land around Wall Settlement in October of 1836. William Southworth was the first postmaster in Wall Settlement. So we all admired William Wall very much. He left New York on his adventure to explore with his friend James Pixley. Both men's families traveled from New York, but they left their wives and children in Jackson until they could find the right land and establish some kind of shelters. This took about 6 weeks. But keep in mind, there were no lumber mills anywhere close by, so our shelters were simply lean-tos of logs and brush. It was October of the same year before the men realized that there were settlers near the Charlotte Prairie west of them. This they discovered only because William's horses wandered, and after the men noticed survey marks on the trees, they followed the survey marks until they saw a man digging potatoes. This man was Amos Kinney, which he was digging potatoes in the area of what is now Bennett Park. And this is how William learned that Samuel and Jonathan Searles and Amos and Stephen Kinney were settling in what would become Charlotte. In the fall of 1836, William Wall would help build a sawmill in Spicerville, which was just south and west of the Wall settlement. This was an exciting time for his wife, Betsy, because she and Mrs. Pixley were able to ride on the log wagon into Spicerville to visit Mrs. Benjamin and Mrs. Spicer. They hadn't seen any other women since moving from Jackson months before. This winter, William Wall had to haul grain 50 miles to south of Jackson, which was at least a 3-day trip, to get it ground into flour. The next summer, a grist mill was built in Jackson, so it was only 30 miles away. And then with great joy, the pioneers celebrated when a grist mill was erected in Eaton Rapids by the Montgomery family in 1838. The forests in Eaton Township in those years were still very wild. Bears and wolves were not uncommon, and the swamps harbored 12-foot-long snakes, black snakes, and even rattlesnakes. In the fall of 1838, Uncle William Wall barely escaped getting hydrophobia. Remember, that's rabies. The story goes that a rabid wolf was working its way through the neighborhood. Its favorite thing was to bite farmers' hogs. The rabid wolf visited several farms, and then William Wall's farmstead about midnight. When he heard the squealing hogs, he sent his dog out to get rid of the wolf. Of course, he didn't know it was a rabid wolf. So the dog he sent out was extremely valuable. It was worth like $50. And the dog was soon locked in combat with the wolf. So William tried to break it up with an axe. According to William's own account, the wolf turned on him, which made him drop the axe and grab the wolf by the tail. He swung the wolf in circles until the dog got a hold on the wolf's neck, and William ended the battle with his axe. He fortunately was not scratched by the infected teeth, But the dog and many hogs in the area were not so lucky. And when the farmers realized it was hydrophobia, they had to dispose of everything that had been bitten. That was a great loss. So my husband, Sidney, was born in 1816 in New York. He was 23 when he made the trip on foot from Detroit and bought his 80 acres. His farm is currently owned by Russ and Marianne Powell and was previously one of the Fowler farms on M50 just past Perky Road. Harry, born in 1819, so he was 20 when he came, purchased 80 acres nearby. This is now excellent farmland, but at the time Sidney and Harry settled, it was covered with timber. In those days, the men spent their energy upgrading the land by cleaning the trees and making it tillable. Harry chopped trees for 2 years before he began any farming. He put up a log house 14 feet by 24 feet, which he lived in for several years. Sidney returned to New York to marry me in 1841. Then it was my turn to help toil on the land, and it was rewarding because we prospered and I had no needs that went unmet. Every year there were new mills and businesses near Charlotte and Eaton Rapids. Sidney and I raised 3 children. Adelaide, she became a school teacher in Charlotte. Henrietta, she married Dr. Amos Knight in Eaton Rapids. And our son, Richard M., he married Mary, who ended up farming with his father and then bought 110 acres across the road from his father's farm. Sidney is a well-loved in the community and likes to entertain friends with his stories. He was township treasurer several times and is remembered for his work on the Highway Commission. Harry married Julia about 1846. Together they had 8 children. Homer farmed on Island Highway near the corner of Hartel Road. Zachary Taylor Allen owned the property where the bowling alley is in Charlotte, and Horace Greeley Allen owned acreage on Island Highway closer into Charlotte. John Allen became a blacksmith in Charlotte. The daughters of the family married, and only Josephine is buried here. These 2 pioneer farmers, Sidney and Harry, have a brother, George, in Grand Rapids, and 2 sisters in Eaton County. Ervilla, the oldest sister, was married to Jones Bellows of Charlotte, and Miranda, wife of Solomon Dorr, lived near Diamonddale. Solomon Dorr received nationwide notoriety twice during the 1890s, and I might as well mention that here. It's kind of colorful. In 1891, according to New York State newspapers, Solomon and his son Clifton innocently came upon a murdered 14-year-old girl floating in the Grand River near Diamonddale. And that made the newspapers. And then in 1895, poor Solomon, he fell from the top of a haystack and hit his head. According to the news, he became a raving maniac, and after the accident, he shut his wife in the bedroom and began sharpening knives because he needed to kill her and his son. Help came in time and they were both okay, but Solomon was committed to the Kalamazoo Asylum. There's not much evidence left of wall settlement as you speed down Clinton Trail, M50, at 60 miles an hour, except the Southeast Cemetery. It's also called the Long Cemetery, which is the old but very well kept cemetery on M50 just past Ackley Road. Harry and Sidney's parents are buried there, as well as the Walls, Southworths, Pixleys, Cranes, and more of the very, very early settlers. Harry and Sidney and their families are here in Maple Hill. Sarah Ann died in December of 1876. Sidney remarried 12 years later to Ruth Rossman. Harry passed in October 1894, and Sidney died a few months later at age 78. And Julianne and Ruth, the wives, lived until 1914 and 1918, respectively, and both into their 80-year-olds. Just on this, Harry and Julie's gravestone reads, "Asleep in Jesus, peaceful rest, whose walking is supremely best." Thank you very much for listening.
Okay. Hello. Good afternoon. My name is Kitty Savage Ainger. With this grave behind me, we won't make you come up the hill today for this one. I would like to tell you about my late husband, Daniel Brainerd Angel, who's buried here. I died after him, and I'm not buried here with him. I'm buried in Olivet. My family's from Olivet, and they chose to bury me within the family plot there. But he does have his first wife here and his son that died as a child, Daniel Jr. Daniel was a very good man. He was often referred to as a soldier, a citizen, and a public official. He passed away at his home in Lansing, but he had a long history with Charlotte and is buried here. His family was originally from Ohio. His father died in 1861, and that year Daniel entered the war, the Civil War, with the 23rd Regiment in Ohio as a private. He was only 17. Rutherford B. Hayes, a name I hope is familiar to all of you, was also in his regiment and was its colonel for some time. Another future president, Billy McKinley, as he was known then, was an aide for General Crook during the war, and later on he and Daniel became close friends when Daniel was working in Washington, D.C. After 18 months of battle, he was discharged for a disability and returned home. As soon as he was able to hold a rifle again, he re-enlisted into the Ohio Infantry, where he served until the end of the war. In 1867, Daniel married Miss Frances or Fanny Ohio Rhodes. Their household was completed by their two daughters, Lulu and Jessie, and Daniel, who passed. And then the wife, Fanny, passed away in 1892. After the war, Daniel learned the printer's trade and worked at several newspapers in Ohio. Armed with this valuable experience in the editorial profession, he moved to Charlotte and purchased the Charlotte Republican in 1877. He made it one of the foremost journals of Southern Michigan at the time. He owned the paper for 20 years. He was able to delegate responsibility for the paper, though, to an associate, as he was appointed as the Postmaster General in Washington, D.C. in 1878. He resumed active ownership of the paper when he returned to Charlotte in 1883, and he sold the paper in 1892. He was very active in politics and was a born leader. In 1885, he was an aide to Governor Alger of Michigan, and 2 years later was Adjutant General under Governor Luce. He was considered one of the foremost members of the Republican Party, but was also active in local politics, including serving on the Charlotte School Board and the Charlotte Water Board. We don't have a water board anymore, I don't believe. Maybe we need one. Daniel was also the commander of Charlotte's A.S. Williams Post of the Grand Army of the Republic, a fraternal organization for Union veterans of the Civil War. When he was postmaster, it was Rutherford B. Hayes' administration that helped out having a friend in high places. Then we married in 1898. My father was a blacksmith in Olivet, and we had what was considered the wedding of the season, and we held it at my parents' home. The house was tastefully decorated, of course, with flowers, and we married under a floral arch in the front parlor. My sister served us a lovely luncheon afterwards. With his connections, Daniel arranged for the Grand Trunk train to make an afternoon express stop for us to take to our Chicago honeymoon, something that normally didn't occur. Daniel, as I said, had many friends in high places. He was friends with several presidents. He was working in Washington as postmaster when President Garfield was shot. And this was a very traumatic incident, of course, to everyone, but especially to him. Daniel was at the post office at his work, just 2 blocks from the site of the crime. He had known Garfield since childhood. He was one of the first men to reach the site of President Garfield after he was carrying out of the reception room of the train depot with an assassin's bullet in his chest. And Daniel said the following. It just seems so today also. It seems horrible. We talk about our civilization and pride ourselves on being superior to the old world in this respect. But think of it. 3 presidents shot in 40 years. There's no living being of rational mind who has an enmity towards McKinley. Garfield was shot at a time of considerable turmoil, but McKinley's assassination has come at a time of universal peace and goodwill and is inexplicable and inexcusable. We are made up of a mixture of nationalities which seems to produce a string of nervous, high-strung individuals whose mentality is easily unbalanced. That's it. Thank you.
Before you leave, we need to thank the sexton, Ricky Hinkin of Maple Hill, and also Chuck Brandon. He cleans these stones and he keeps us from getting lost on the tour. and he also does research. And we also need to thank Don Calisi and Tom Fullerton for their advertising of this event. Julie for all the research she does. Julie, give him a wave. Come on. And also Mike Delaware, he does the filming of this, and you can catch all this video on YouTube and probably within a week. It takes a while for him to make us look really good. So thank you for coming. It's a beautiful day. You can take the tour again if you wish, or just wander the cemetery for a while.
Well, that's going to conclude today's journey through history here at Maple Hill Cemetery. I just got done with the historic walking tour put on by the Eaton County Historical Commission, and they did a fabulous job this year as always. So if you liked today's video, please take a minute to hit the like button down there, subscribe to the channel, share this video with others, and thanks for watching. I'll see you next time.